Peter, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Very nice to see you. Sorry, I caught you
No, that's okay.
a slurp there. Shall we start with the book? A Revolution Betrayed, How Egalitarians Wrecked the British Education System. Is egalitarian now a dirty word, then?
Well, for me, it's not so much a dirty word, it's a great mistake. Almost everybody claims to be in favour of equality for its own sake.
Yes.
And I think that this is dishonest. Most people don't really believe in it in practice. They understand that people are different and have different abilities in all kinds of different ways. And it's crazy to try and treat people as if they're all the same. Right. I lived in an egalitarian state once in the Soviet Union, and it was the most privileged place I'd ever come across.
And some were more equal than others.
Well, the top communists they didn't live in huge, gigantic luxury, most of them, but they did live far better than everybody else. They had bigger, nicer flats. I got one of them. I got a nomenclatura flat with 14-foot ceilings and lovely views across Moscow and oak parquet floors and chandeliers. That was
And was that because you were a foreign correspondent?
No, it's because I illegally rented it from a member of the elite.
Of course.
I can confess this now, because the country in which I did it no longer exists. But yeah, but it was interesting insight. I even got ration cards delivered, including quite a large vodka ration, which I have to confess I never dared collect because I thought the sight of a foreigner at the vodka distribution centre would probably cause a riot. So I didn't do it. But you could see how they lived. Special hospitals and special compartments in trains and waiting rooms at airports and stations and stuff. They had a completely separate life. A book was written about it once. It's quite opulent by their standards, and this is in a country which had set out equality as being its main aim. It never really works.
And for the people who weren't in that sort of rather elite arena, was it equal for everybody else or not?
Well, yes, but
equally bad.
It was equally bad, as you rightly say. I mean, bad housing, bad schools, unsafe travel, very poor medical treatment unless you paid bribes. And in many ways pretty dismal. Everybody knew this, and of course it wasn't really discussable because it was all part of the system.
Funnily enough, what you've just described, it reminds me of what I heard this morning when Julia Hartley-Brewer was talking to, I think it might have been Jim White out in Qatar, who was describing the scene in Doha last night, where suddenly there was a bit of atmosphere. A lot of migrant workers had come out wearing different football shirts, and they were queuing for the underground. But there was a special channel over here for Qatari residents who didn't have to wait to get into the underground, who could just go straight through.
Yes, which tells you something, doesn't it?
It does, and that's how it operates there. And, you know, I'm not going to get into the whys and wherefores of the World Cup with you, but, you know, again, we've got millionaire footballers talking about equality, and you go, well, there's not much equality here, actually. No. If you're a millionaire footballer.
There very seldom is, and it's a kind of substitute for religion among people to claim they believe in this utopia of equality. They want a world which is transformed, in which basically human nature is abolished and people cease to be the way they actually are. And we all know that people differ. And the thing about the grammar schools was that they recognised that if you were going to have good schools, and it's the truth of it is, and everybody in reality knows this too, all good schools are selective schools. All good schools keep out trouble, they keep out bad behaviour, they keep out people who hold other people back, otherwise they can't be good schools.
And they reward hard work and results.
Yeah, sometimes they do, but the thing is that there will always be a process of selection. Some sort of selection will take place. In modern Britain, that selection takes place through money. You pay for it. Either you pay fees or you buy a house in the catchment area of a better school. It seems to be a much better idea, especially in education, is to choose the children who've got the best chance of benefiting from it, however much money their parents have or don't have. And that, for a brief and wonderful 20 years in this country, was the system which we had. And it worked extremely well. One of the things that my book does is it lists in one of the appendices all the people we could find who'd risen to successful heights in their careers in who's who had been to grammar schools. It probably underestimates, because apart from the grammar school equivalents in Scotland, we usually not called that. It's harder to find. But an awful lot of people you will find, particularly interesting in the armed services, as well as in judges, scientists, civil servants, media people, actors, great actors like Alan Rickman, for instance, actually got to the heights of their careers by having gone to selective state schools of the kind which we've since abolished. So it gives you an indication of what could have happened to this country There's a blossoming of talent which could have happened to this country if we'd kept these schools, which was shut off abruptly after 1965 when we went back to selection by money.
And in the end, the result has been a lack of education sort of all round, hasn't it?
Oh, it's terrible. The grammar schools, because they selected by ability, had very high standards. In the early 1960s, late 1950s, it was commonly said that a set of English A-levels was worth the same as an American college degree.
Yes.
And this, I think, was true. And people didn't go to university, anything like the numbers they did in those days. But they were emerging from school after A-levels extremely well educated. And they were going into areas like the police force or the armed services or the civil service with this extremely good, hard education. And the examinations which those schools took reflected this. They were very tough exams. Once the grammar schools were gone and were replaced almost entirely by comprehensives, the exams were too difficult, so they had to be, first of all, watered down and then completely revolutionised. And so the whole standard of education has fallen. The private schools, the fee-charging schools, and the remaining grammar schools, which don't have anything really in common with the old ones, they can sail through the existing exams because they're so easy for them. And they look incredibly good, but they're nothing like as good as they look, and they're nothing like as toughly educated.
But don't you think the problem as well has become that education is now not for the same thing it used to be for? Education used to be for the purposes of actually educating someone into having a base knowledge of quite a lot of things and an inquiring mind, whereas now it seems to be more about indoctrination. My kids tell me that very rarely are they encouraged to express views which are not the views that they're taught.
I think that's very true. Obviously, there was a certain amount of, how shall I put it, ideological education in the old. It was a socially and morally and probably religiously conservative sort of education compared with what we have now. So it wasn't free of what its enemies would call indoctrination, but it was also much, much more rigorous. You were expected to know, and if you're expected to know and learn things, then if the knowledge that you have comes up against opinion, then knowledge will win. And that's what we used to have in this country until quite recently, an elite of people who, when knowledge came up against opinion, preferred knowledge.
Yes. And
you can see this in the response to the COVID panic of a couple of years ago. We had an elite where, when they came up against an opinion which a knowledgeable person could see was plainly crazy, they accepted that opinion.
Yes.
They hadn't been properly educated in the rigours of knowledge.
No.
That's what we missed.
And they also kept repeating ad nauseum the phrase "follow the science" when it wasn't actually science. Well, when it was behavioural science, which is something completely different.
Science is a method of discovering, as far as possible, the truth, and it's a very rigorous method, and it constantly revises itself. And if you make a hero out of science as an abstract concept, you won't get very far. There's an awful lot of this, and that science is only valuable because it's prepared to admit it's wrong.
Yes. And
that's what it basically does. The whole process of experiment, what was the accepted view of everything 50 years ago, has now in huge numbers of areas changed completely because experiments have shown what we used to think is wrong.
And what we used to think about education will never return, I don't think, will it?
When I set out to write the book, I thought and hoped that it might provide the starting gun for a debate which might conceivably lead to the restoration of academic selection in education. After all, Germany still has it. And in fact, East Germany brought it back, the former East Germany brought it back after communism collapsed. So it can be done. I just don't think there's the will in this country, or indeed the knowledge base. Where would you find teachers ready and willing and able to teach at the levels of rigour which the old grammar schools used to have?
Yes.
And I love it if I was wrong. But I had to say I came to the very pessimistic conclusion that it's probably...
I think teachers have been changed irrevocably because, again, they're going through a teaching process that they're learning at the altar of sort of wokeism and wokery.
And yet so many people go into teaching with an ambition to do good and are frustrated when they get into schools to find they have to be policemen and social workers rather than teachers.
There have been one or two notable sort of exceptions, but they tend to be personally sort of driven, don't they? Like Catherine Berbel.
Yeah, she's a force of nature.
Who is brilliant.
There aren't many people who can do that.
But she can make a school in a not very good area very successful by virtue of her personality.
But she's working against the system.
Yeah.
And the comprehensive system doesn't favour people like her. And if she were to leave, I mean, maybe there's somebody with the same level of determination and sheer power of personality who could take it on. But maybe there's not. And so many schools, for a while, they're great. They have a good head. then the head leaves and is replaced by somebody who's
and she's no friend of the
system.
establishment, is she?
Absolutely
she's constantly
not,
getting
no.
brickbats.
No.
And in the end, quite a lot of people sort of give up because it's hard to be. I mean, you know this better than anyone. It's hard to be fighting the tide every single day.
It's very hard,
you know,
it's
and it can be very debilitating.
It can be, and of course the other thing is it takes you away from what you really want and need to be doing, which in her case is of course teaching and running the school.
Yeah, because even now I look at your Twitter quite often at the weekends more than during the week. You know, and it's a constant sort of barrage of just people being offensive or being abusive and just, you know, dismissing your views. And it is hard to do.
Well, but the thing is, I've decided to turn this to my advantage. My view is I can learn from it. You must never, ever assume that you've got your message through to everybody. There are many, many people who you have not reached, some who you will obviously never reach, others who you might, but never, ever be under the delusion that just because some people agree with you and some people think you're right, that most people do, you have to carry on arguing and you have to improve and streamline and generally strengthen your arguments. And the more of a barrage of abuse you take, the better I think you get at it. So I use it basically as a stone on which to sharpen my knife.
Yes. Quite a few things to still get through. The price we're paying for the COVID lockdowns, first of all, I suppose.
Well, I think it is now evident that we are paying in the last so-called autumn statement budget the price which I absolutely predicted back in March 2020 we would pay for the furlough and all the shutdowns of vast areas of the economy. It was not free, and the idea that people seem to have that it was free or in some way could be put off forever was one of the reasons why they never examined either in public debate or in political circles, they never examined the cost-benefit relation between what they were doing and what they were spending, which they should have done, because if they had, they'd have begun to realise that what they were doing was not merely futile, but also an immense blow to an already pretty badly damaged economy, which we now suffer. And I just can't believe, looking back, that certainly in the initial couple of weeks, I was virtually the only person anywhere saying this. And why were there not more people? And therefore I have to. It's one of my few pleasures in life, as you know, is saying "I told you so." But I really have to rub in.
You do. You must.
I told you so.
Because we began. I mean,
where were you?
Yeah.
When there was. And the explanation of this, why is it that so many people fell into this huge groupthink, is the thing which really needs to be understood. Otherwise, we'll do it again on something equally dark.
No, I mean, we began this journey of ours, you and I, with me disagreeing with you quite fundamentally about why we were locking it down and why we should have to do it. And I mean, I still kind of have there's a slight, I mean, they talk about fiscal drag. I've got this sort of, I've got this kind of intellectual drag of some kind, in which I still think that because of what we didn't know, we sort of had to do it.
Yeah, but the thing is that you did two things. First of all, you gave me a microphone on which to offer a contrary opinion to yours. And secondly, when I persuaded you, you admitted that I persuaded you, which I have to say most people would not have done. And because
now we're in this weird position, I was talking to somebody about this at the weekend, where instead of somehow affecting the price of fuel, what we're doing is we're going to tax the companies that are charging us too much for it. Yes. We're going to give that money to the people who are going to give it back to the companies.
Well, okay.
That's kind of where we are.
I found that I was warning in 2008 that the way in which we were goading Russia was going to lead to an energy crisis.
You were?
And there again, it was clearly visible. You did not need to be some super expert in the energy field to see that this was, or in diplomacy, to see that this was coming. And this is there's a rather fine picture in today's Guardian, by the way, of a coal-fired power station. Do you remember those?
I do.
It's in China, of course, because all our coal-fired power stations, almost all, I think there are one or two still left, have been closed
and blown up.
Closed, as you say. Blown up with explosives. Yeah. Wasn't that an incredible act of arrogance?
Absolutely amazing.
Almost anybody understands if you've got a very expensive piece of kit, even if just at the moment it may not suit you, if you can find somewhere to store it or mothball it, you might need it again.
Right.
A lot of us live too much on this principle. Our houses are cluttered with stuff which we think we might need again, which we never will. But I think coal-fired power stations would now be very useful. The Germans bring theirs back into service.
This weekend, notwithstanding the very hard work that Michael Gove put in to make people not want to buy and wood-burning stoves. Loads of people are now buying wood-burning stoves because they've worked out, actually, it's quite a good way of heating the house.
The problem is we end up having the country deforested, so everyone goes out with axes and chops all the trees down.
But people keep telling us that that's sustainable because you can just plant more trees, surely.
Well, yes. They do take rather a long time to grow.
Well, that's what I've always said to these people who go, yeah, but it's much more sustainable. Well, not in your lifetime, it's not. No. You know how many trees you need to grow to build a house?
Yeah, we haven't got enough trees in this country anyway. But but sure. But I think coal-fired power stations are a much more efficient way of powering
I tell people the story
than wood-fired stoves.
Also, coal is amazing. I mean, I moved into a house once in Wiltshire and discovered a bunker full of coal had been left there, and so I've actually burned coal in the fireplace. I've never had such a hot house. It was fantastic.
No,
you used hardly any coal, and it would last all night. And you would be roasting. It was brilliant.
In my childhood, it was what you did. You had a coal fire, and they were great. But
they were.
That's gone. And again, the coal-fired power stations are much cleaner than individual.
Well, do you know what's ridiculous as well?
But they've become very efficient, and to close them down it's just and then, as I say, to blow them up. Yeah. It's expensive.
Well, in Poland, they still use an awful lot of coal. They still mine an awful lot of coal, and they put it in their power stations. An awful lot of the electricity that is currently being used to power electric cars, for example, is generated by coal.
Of course.
So it's not actually any greener anyway.
No, it's a fantasy that we have, and it's like the preoccupation with equality. It's utopian desire to make the world a better place, which is completely when it comes up against reason and facts, it ignores reason and facts. I mean, let's assume that everything they say about coal-fired power stations in the atmosphere is true. So I'll argue about that. But in that case, what good does it do if we close down, say, 20 coal-fired power stations, and China and India then build 400?
Yeah, it doesn't do any good at all.
And they say, well, it set an example. Well, to whom has it set an example? Where in the world is anybody saying, oh, well, the British have blown up all their coal-fired power stations, so we won't build any?
Yeah.
Nobody.
So far, we haven't seen that.
Nobody anywhere has ever said that.
No. Now, I knew this would happen, so I'm going to read this out to you because I'm sure you'll have a view. I'm always unsure. Paul from Staffordshire says, Mike, winter officially starts on December the 21st, called the winter solstice. The daylight is at its shortest length that day, but after that day, daylight will start getting longer each day. So, like myself, celebrate that great event. There's various different views of when winter and summer start, isn't there?
How could you possibly make it official? I mean, it happens at a different time every year. Yeah. For me, it's the week after the last week in which it's possible to mow the lawn.
Right.
Or necessary. Yeah, I think winter started.
Well, we're in it now.
Last week, I was still mowing my lawn right up to the 13th of November, which is late.
That is late.
Yeah, but it was still doable and necessary.
Yeah, my lawn hasn't been, I don't think, mown since about September.
Well, I wouldn't like to go into that.
It's not bad.
The neighbours possibly would like to have a word with you.
Well, no, it's not very long grass at all. But the heat also helps the grass to grow, doesn't it? So if it's unseasonably warm,
apparently the light has the light is what makes the leaves fall. When the days become particularly short, that's when the leaves begin to fall.
I would also say that I consider it to be winter when I've got a big oak tree in my garden. When the leaves have all come off that, then it's definitely winter.
Yeah, you see, these things you can't make a thing like winter official.
No.
Because it's...
And also by winter solstice...
By its nature.
By the 21st of December, we've been in winter for a while, surely. That's not when it begins.
I would have guessed so, but the idea that Christmas means snow is a pretty weird idea.
It is now.
Seldom get snow.
I haven't seen snow on Christmas Day, I don't think.
I mean, all these interminable Christmas advertisements on the television at the moment, they all feature snow.
But I have got pictures of myself as a small child in the 60s walking through very, very snowy streets in London. And around about age of 4 or 5 years old. So
I don't think it was every year, though.
Not every year,
even then it was.
But now it's never.
No.
I mean, if it snows at all now, you're kind of going, "Oh, this is nice."
Well, it might happen this year.
Well, I hope so. I should look forward to it. Yeah. We must discuss Christmas actually, as far as what we're all doing, because I don't know what we're doing yet. But when I find out, I'll tell you.
Do.
Thank you, Peter Hitchens. Back next week on Monday.